Once again, a very warm welcome to the program. I am Nyasha K. Mutizwa. The morning call begins right now. Corruption continues to harm Africa, hampering democracy and development and the ability to bring people out of poverty. The continent ranks lowest amongst global regions in Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, CPI. Countries in Africa average 32 out of 100 in their CPI scores, and 6 out of the bottom 10 countries are African. Roughly 43% of African countries are living in poverty, while over $50 billion worth of stolen assets flow out of the continent every year. Misappropriated funds account for a 25% loss of development resources within the continent, Ruth.
Indeed, an estimated $148 billion is what corruption costs African countries each year, according to the president of the African Development Bank. The African continent ranked last in terms of the views on corruption in the latest Transparency International report, a factor that hinders the continent's development. Out of the 10 countries considered to be the most corrupt in the world, 6 are in sub-Saharan Africa, and Africa loses 25% of its wealth, which reduces private investment and therefore slows down development.
And now to understand a little more, we are joined by Samuel Kaninda, who is the Africa Regional Advisor at Transparency International, joining us from Cotonou in Benin. Thank you so much for joining us here on the morning call. Now, the world recently marked International Anti-Corruption Day under the theme United Against Corruption. So in what ways do you think Africa can unite to put a stop to the scandals that we hear every day?
Yeah, indeed, the call to unite for corruption is key. And in Africa, to answer your question, that is even more critical because we are one of the regions in the world that are most affected by corruption. It affects, the realization of our development goals. So the unity we are talking about should start from there, acknowledging that corruption is indeed an issue that needs addressing, and then taking that unity of action and purpose further to come up with a concrete set of actions, because what we've seen is that some countries are more advanced in terms of decisive action than others, and that shows in the many results. So it should be in terms of unity of purpose, understanding what the devastation or the magnitude of the devastation that corruption is causing, but also then unity in tackling the challenge.
Given the very alarming figures we quoted earlier, do you think African leaders are doing enough to curb corruption in their countries?
Well, one has a mixed picture in that regard. You cannot put them all in the same bag, if you will. You see some countries where, because what is key, what we've always said, to fight corruption, you need political will at the highest level of decision-making in the country up to the lowest level. And what you are talking about is really an issue if we have leaders of countries who are not operating with levels of integrity that would then translate into the actions they would take to tackle corruption itself. So we've seen some countries that are faring quite well, the likes of Botswana, Rwanda, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Cabo Verde, where even from our own perceptions index, are faring quite well because of a number of actions that have been taken, but also political will and leadership at that highest level. But if at that level of leadership, you have individuals or the leaders themselves who are compromised in terms of corruption, it goes without saying that any effort to address the issue would not be met with results that would be satisfactory for the people and any observer, for that matter.
So, Mr. Kaninda, according to the UN Development Programme, funds lost by developing countries to corruption are estimated at 10 times the amount of official development assistance. What is your view on this?
Well, it's a very sad reality, because what this means is the development of the continent, of our 55 nations on the continent, could be achieved even without aid if we had better governance in our respective countries, which would mean that the resources that are accrued be it from natural resources, we have human resources, one of the most youthful continent in the world, would serve the purpose of lifting the majority of our people from poverty. And of course, we would engage in different ways of cooperation with the rest of the world. But this means that we have the resources on the continent to address the issues of development, but these resources are being diverted for private and egoistic purposes.
Well, Mr. Kaninda, we have to end that there this morning. But of course, we do hope that we're moving in the right direction in the fight against corruption. Thank you once again for joining us on the program. That was Samuel Kaninda, from the African Regional Advisor, from Transparency International, joining us from Cotonou in Benin. Back to you, Ruth.
Thank you, Samuel. You're still watching The Morning Call. Let's take a look at more stories making headlines on the continent.